Welcome to Darkness Notes coaches, terrifying secrets, and mysterious stories that will make you tremble. They weren't buried to rest, they were stored to be watched. A whisper from the dark earth beneath 143 unmarked skeletons, each one screaming the same thing. This was never just a church. It was a furnace for the human soul. You were never supposed to hear this story. They sealed the records, scrubbed the names, burned the last copies in a federal incinerator outside Albany. But they missed something, and I have what they missed. This is not folklore, not paranoia. This is dangerous knowledge of a family so soaked in spiritual authority that they turned salvation into surgery, mercy into mutilation, and worship into submission. The Ravencroft brothers didn't found a church, they founded a system, a psychological forge designed to melt your identity and recast it in their image. They understood something most men never will. If you control a man's pain, you control his soul, and they did, perfectly. Ravenwood, 1825, a small town choking in its own silence. Fields of wet ash, fog thick enough to hide scenes from 100 feet away. The Second Great Awakening was tearing through New York like wildfire. Every town had its preacher, its prophet, its lunatic. But Ravenwood was quiet, until three men arrived: Ezra, Silas, and Caleb Ravencroft. They didn't ask for trust. They didn't need permission. They built something out of black stone with no windows and a steeple that split the sky like a blade. They said it was a church, but it was a monument to suffering, and they named it the Church of the Pure Spirit. Ezra was the fire. He spoke like God was behind his teeth. When he looked at you, you looked away, not out of shame but because something inside you said, "This man sees what I hide." Silas was the scribe, always writing, recording dreams, sketching symbols. He once said, "Words are weapons, but arrangement is ritual." Caleb was the threshold. He didn't need to speak. His silence was a sermon. His eyes, so pale they looked like clouded glass, would drift up and roll back during what he called communion with the invisible. When he whispered, crowds fell quiet. His voice was a gate. They arrived wealthy, purchased 80 acres just outside Ravenwood, paid in gold coins, foreign origin, no bank account, no ledger, and they built first the church, then the chambers around it, then the tunnels. No one questioned them because they didn't ask for help. They employed their own men brought in from outside, laborers who spoke little, kept to themselves, and vanished as soon as the stone was laid. The town watched, and waited, curious at first, then uneasy. But the Ravencrofts knew how to bait a soul. They didn't demand obedience, they invited pain. And for the broken, that was enough. Their sermons were not calls to joy, they were hymns to affliction. God does not want your praise, Ezra preached. He wants your scars. At first, it was only the damaged who came. A widow whose children had drowned in the river, a veteran who awoke screaming, a drunkard who'd beaten his wife so long she no longer cried. They came not for forgiveness but for meaning, and Ezra gave it. What has hurt you is not punishment, it is preparation. The pain was your offering, your trauma, your tithe. The Church of the Pure Spirit grew by subtraction. It didn't add members, it stripped them, piece by piece. First the name, then the shame, then the past, and what remained was clay. And clay obeys. Within a year they had 100 followers. Most gave up everything. Homes, land, inheritance. They didn't call it a cult, they called it cleansing. They were taught that suffering purifies, that silence is obedience, that the flesh is a gate and pain is the key. There were rituals, long fasts, confessionals that began in whispers and ended in screams, cold water baptisms that left bodies shaking, teeth cracked. The congregation didn't flinch. They rejoiced, because they had been taught the body must break for the soul to rise, and break it did. In December of 1829, everything changed. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year. Ezra called it the First Ascension. All 150 members gathered in the sanctuary, no windows, 12 candles arranged in a spiral on the floor. Caleb emerged from a side chamber, skin pale, lips purple, moving like he wasn't fully in control of his limbs. He began to speak, not in English, not in Latin, in sound-sharp, guttural, high-pitched tones that scratched something ancient. Behind the ears, the room shuddered, and then, silence. When he spoke again, it was in his own voice, but slower. He announced the names of 3 members, Sarah Pembroke, Michael Collins, Rebecca Winters. He said the Spirit had chosen them for elevation. They were led to the center platform, bound to wooden frames in the shape of inverted crosses. The Ravencrofts said it was not blasphemy, it was reversal. From pride to humility, from life to death. to rebirth. What followed was not ritual, it was engineering. A system of 7 trials. Trial of air, cloths soaked, pressed to faces while water trickled slowly, simulating drowning. Trial of earth, packed in church soil up to the neck, buried, suffocating. Trial of fire, heated metal burned into their skin in precise, geometric patterns. Trial of water, ice baptisms, repeated until unconscious, and 3 more trials unrecorded except by those who broke and fled. But something happened during those trials. Something worse than pain. They changed. Eyes rolled back, joints contorted. One began to chant the same strange tongue as Caleb. When dawn came, their bodies were broken, but alive. Ezra declared them emptied of sin. Caleb placed his hands on their heads, whispered. They convulsed. Bones cracked, voices changed, and then silence dead. Ezra called it holy death, no judgment, no purgatory, direct ascension. Their bodies, he said, were relics, not buried, preserved, placed on stone slabs beneath the church, prayed over, honored, idolized. The congregation didn't mourn, they celebrated. They believed these deaths were victory. Proof that the Ravencrofts could deliver you beyond suffering, beyond self, beyond death, and so they stayed. More were chosen, more died. The chamber beneath the church grew first 3, then 13, then dozens, until the earth beneath Ravenwood was full of still mouths, still watching. This wasn't revival, it was resurrection in reverse, not rising from the grave but worshipping the descent into it. The Ravencrofts had found the formula: suffering as sacrament, death as transformation, devotion as domination, and no one stopped them, not because they hid, but because they wore the mask of religion, and in 19th century America, there was no mask more bulletproof. From 1830 to 1845, they refined everything: the rituals, the conditioning, the architecture, the doctrine. They created chambers beneath the earth, the chamber of trials, the chamber of ascension, the chamber of saints, each with purpose, each with precision, each one designed to annihilate the self. By the end, the followers didn't just obey, they volunteered, they begged to be chosen, to suffer, to die, to become pure. Because when a man has been taught that his pain is the only thing that makes him worthy, he will crawl into the fire and smile. And they did. You need to understand this. Because what the Ravencrofts built in Ravenwood didn't die when the last chamber was sealed. It evolved, it spread, it became a blueprint, a prototype for every system that needs you empty to fill you. Every doctrine that tells you to surrender, every voice that says, pain is your path. They weren't just cult leaders, they were architects, and their design lives on. You see it in institutions, in movements, in anything that teaches you to trade your will for acceptance, that teaches you to bleed for belonging, that says salvation comes only when you give everything. This wasn't just a story, this was a mirror, and if you see yourself in it, good, that means you're ready. Because in section 2 we go deeper into the tunnels, into the theology, into the real purpose of the Chamber of Saints. But before we descend, I need you to mark this moment. Write this in the comments: through suffering. I see, right? It twice, you'll understand why soon. It's not a phrase. It's a seal, a declaration, a trigger. For now, you know the Ravencrofts opened the gate, but you haven't seen what they let in. They called it the Chamber of Saints, but saints don't rot in stone tunnels. Saints don't smile with cracked teeth and hollow eyes, preserved in poses of agony and prayer. The Chamber of Saints was never about reverence, it was about memory. Not yours, theirs. The Ravencrofts weren't just recording devotion, they were encoding obedience into death itself. And every corpse, every folded hand and sunken rib was a page in their sacred book. Elizabeth Carver saw it. She was one of the few who survived long enough to flee. She entered the Chamber of Saints in 1837 and described it later to federal investigators. The smell hits you first, she said. Not decay, not rot, but chemicals, turpentine, alcohol, sweet, cloying, embalming fluids that clung to your throat. Then came the silence. Not holy silence, but calculated, loaded silence. Like walking into a room that's still listening. The bodies were arranged in perfect order by date of elevation. Some mummified, some skeletons wired into kneeling postures, others just barely preserved, waxen skin stretched over bone. And they were all watching. I thought they were going to speak, Elizabeth confessed. I prayed they wouldn't. The walls were lined with scripture, not the Bible but Silas's journals, written in mirrored script, etched into black stone. Verses like, "What survives suffering is sacred," or, "The vessel must break for the spirit to enter," or, "The most repeated pain is not punishment. Pain is permission. The Chamber of Saints was not a tomb, it was a curriculum, and every convert was expected to study it, to meditate there, to reflect, to kneel, to imagine themselves as part of the gallery one day. That was the point, not just to see death but to crave it. And if that sounds impossible to you, you've never known real indoctrination. You've never had your identity so carefully undone, piece by piece, until your only hope of salvation becomes the hand that's drowning you. That's what the Ravencrofts understood. Most religious tyrants use fear, but fear fades. So they replaced it with yearning for the trial, yearning for the test, yearning to be seen finally, completely as worthy of pain. The Chamber of Saints created loyalty that could not be broken, because it made obedience a desire, not a demand. And that was just one chamber. There were more. By 1835, the underground structure beneath the church had expanded beyond anyone's comprehension. There were 7 known chambers, but witnesses hinted at more. A labyrinth, a descent. The architecture was intentional. You didn't walk straight to the center. You spiraled. You passed through corridors that narrowed, ceilings that dropped lower, and with each step, the air thickened. The lanterns dimmed, the silence deepened. The outermost rooms were symbolic. Prayer, meditation, cleansing. But the deeper you went, the more the structure changed. Symbols etched into walls. Carvings in languages no one recognized. Circles of salt. Bones embedded in mortar. And always, the sound. A kind of pulsing hum. Subtle, like the earth breathing beneath you. Converts called it the murmur. They said it was the voice of the spirit moving through the stone, but others, those who escaped, said it was a machine, a resonance device, something Caleb had built based on ancient diagrams and fractured occult texts, a tool for altering consciousness. Silas wrote about resonant unbinding, the theory that sound, when applied at specific frequencies and with symbolic intention, could fracture a person's identity, that it could unlock them, empty them, reformat them, and the chambers were designed to amplify that. Some rooms had angled walls, others were domes. Many were tiled with minerals that conducted sound. These were not accidents, these were blueprints. Caleb often told initiates, "You are not here to learn, you are here to dissolve," and they did. Over time, witnesses reported strange behavioral changes in the followers. Speech patterns flattened, emotions dulled. Many no longer referred to themselves by name. They spoke in terms of function, vessel, witness, ashling. They no longer asked questions, they obeyed, they craved ritual. Some began flagellating themselves in private, others begged to be placed in observation rooms where they could fast in isolation for days, surrounded only by the sound of slow pulsing tones from the church's hidden speakers. You might think this is madness, that no one would consent to this, but you'd be wrong. Because when a man is told he is broken again and again, and offered a path to wholeness that requires only obedience, he will walk it willingly. And that's the real secret of the Raven. They didn't build a cult. They built a psychological operating system, one that still exists, not as a church, but as a template. You've seen pieces of it, in self-help movements that demand total surrender, in corporate cultures that rewrite language until everyone speaks the same hollow mantras, in therapy groups where pain is endlessly dissected but never healed. Pain has power, and the Ravencrofts knew how to weaponize it. Now let's talk about the Ascension Doctrine. On the surface, it was simple. Suffering purifies. Death completes the process. But within the inner circle, it was more complex. Elevation required stages. First, discernment. Prophet Caleb would isolate a member, speak with them, touch their forehead, whisper in their ear. What he said was never recorded, but those who underwent it often came back changed, quiet, focused, obedient. Second, seeding. Silas would assign them scriptures to study, texts not shared with the broader congregation. These texts were not Christian. They included fragments of the Corpus Hermeticum, translations of Enochian rituals, diagrams resembling Mesopotamian maps, and personal writings of Silas himself, filled with phrases like the separation of selves and the unbinding of the outer man. Third, fasting, not just from food but from light, speech, sleep, complete sensory reduction for up to 40 days, monitored, documented. Fourth, exposure. The initiate was brought to the chamber of trials. There they were subjected to the 7 acts. You've heard some, but others were darker. Psychological trials, forced confessions, hallucinogenic herbs administered without warning, simulated executions, and always the murmur in the background. Fifth, collapse. The point at which the initiate's ego structure shattered. They wept, screamed, begged, or simply stopped reacting. They were no longer who they were. They were ready. Then came the sixth stage, the marking. Ezra would carve symbols into the initiate's skin, not randomly, but according to charts designed by Silas. Each mark represented a gate, a trial overcome, a self extinguished, and finally the seventh, the gift. Caleb would perform the elevation, sometimes with prayer, sometimes with a knife, sometimes both. The body was preserved, the death was recorded as ascension, and the Ravencrofts moved on. The doctrine was perfect. It provided meaning, structure, clarity, but most importantly it created identity through obedience. And that's where most modern minds fail to understand. They think cults manipulate people. No, cults replace people. The Ravencrofts didn't deceive their followers. They erased them, and then they rewrote them. Now let me ask you a question, and don't answer too fast. Who are you right now? Strip the job, the family, the name, what's left. If you feel the chill in your chest, you're starting to understand. The Ravencrofts built their church on that space. That blank, that void, that silence where identity should be, and then they filled it with ritual, pain, obedience, until their followers became mirrors reflecting only what was projected onto them. But the most disturbing part, the part I haven't told you yet, is that it worked. There are documented cases, dozens of individuals who survived elevation, who were brought back from the edge, or so it seemed, but they were no longer themselves changed, hollowed, efficient. Some were embedded into other congregations across the Northeast. Others became missionaries. 2 went into government work. And all of them carried something with them. Not just the scars, but the system, the method. They taught it, disguised it, abstracted it, and the principles began to leak into fields that never knew where they came from. Psychology, education, correctional systems, even early intelligence agencies. Yes, we have evidence that certain fragments of Silas's work were studied by the OSS in the 1940s under the codename Project Abra. But that's not for now, that's for later. For now, I want you to realize something. The Church of the Pure Spirit is not gone. Not really, it's just rebranded. Because once a system for breaking the human will is perfected, it doesn't die, it evolves, it adapts, it finds new names, new icons, new rituals, but the structure remains, in doctrine, in discipline, in dogma, and in the belief that your suffering is sacred. In Section 3, we're going deeper into the real map of the underground complex, the glyph system used by Silas to chart psychological thresholds, and the rumors that 3 descendants of the Ravencroft line survived and continued the work abroad. But before we go further, remember what I told you. Comment below. Through suffering, I see. Write it again, and mean it. Because the descent doesn't stop here. It accelerates. You've felt the edge of the truth. But soon, you'll see what's buried beneath it. There was a map, but it was never on paper. The original Ravencroft complex wasn't built like a church. It was built like a maze. A ritual labyrinth, designed not for navigation, but for transformation. Each room wasn't just a place. It was a test, a stage, a psychological wound you had to pass through. Silas called it the interior spiral, and only those who had been broken open completely, fully could even comprehend it. The structure began beneath the pulpit, behind a false stone panel in the floor, sealed with 3 iron bolts etched with a sigil, a triangle inside a circle wrapped in vines of thorns. Below that, a winding staircase of 91 steps, not 90, not 92, 91 matching the 91 Enochian servitors described in John Dee's secret journals. Silas believed the number unlocked dimensional focus. As initiates descended, their senses were slowly deprived. No light, no sound, just the steady descent. Step by step, fear folding into numbness. Then the first threshold, the room of echoes. No furnishings, just a smooth floor and domed ceiling. Any sound made inside was delayed, distorted. The voice returning to you wasn't your own. It was deeper, crooked, like something was speaking back but not in your language. Initiates would sit here, blindfolded, until they began to doubt the edges of their own thoughts. This was the point. To dissolve ownership of the inner voice. To make your own mind sound foreign. Many never progressed past this room. The ones who did were led through a narrowing corridor into what they called the cradle. A room shaped like a womb, walls curved, padded in places, warmed, red light pulsating like a heartbeat. This is where regression happened. They stripped initiates naked, fed them milk and honey. Repeated chants used in ancient fertility rites. The goal was not comfort, it was infantilization, to return you to a state before identity, before choice, before defiance. From there the path grew cruel. The descent of glass, a hallway lined with mirrors but warped ones. Each segment of the corridor bent your reflection, stretched it, shattered it, until what you saw no longer resembled anything human. Some mirrors were inscribed with Latin phrases, others in strange phonetic glyphs. Silas believed that by distorting your reflection, your subconscious would fracture its attachment to the self. The soul, he wrote, clings most to what it recognizes in the mirror. Remove the mirror, and the soul seeks a new anchor. They provided that anchor in the next chamber, the threshold of names. Here initiates were told their real names, not the ones given by parents, but the ones assigned by the church. Each name encoded a purpose, a role, and a death. You were never James, Caleb once whispered to a trembling boy. You were Ashen Mouth, and that is all you've ever been. Some resisted. Most didn't. They were too broken to question, too eager for meaning. That's how it worked. You were emptied in stages, emptied of voice, emptied of time, emptied of self, and then filled with code, doctrine, identity as they designed it. Now here's what's most disturbing. The glyphs. Silas created hundreds, each based on fragments from ancient alphabets, mystical diagrams, even geometry from crop circles, and temple floor plans. He kept them in a black-bound journal called the Book of Shapes. Lost in 1903 during the Federal Church inquiry, but fragments have surfaced. These weren't just symbols, they were keys. Each one matched a psychological state: denial, submission, silence, obedience, erasure. They weren't decorative. They were deployed, etched into the walls of the complex, carved into initiate's flesh, painted into meditation circles. One glyph, known as Seraphonal, was reserved only for those who had reached complete ego death. It resembled a spiral that folded in on itself, an infinity loop that broke midway. Witnesses said it induced vertigo just looking at it, like staring into something that wasn't meant to be seen in a world with logic. The glyph system became a language, an internal grammar. Converts would stop speaking in normal terms and begin to use glyph codes in conversation. He is between cross-eye and fallen branch. Or she is nearing the sun. Outsiders thought it was madness, but it was structure that bypassed the rational mind. You see, when you can label a human soul like a file, you stop treating it like a person. And that's the point. Because once identity becomes architecture, obedience becomes the only way to survive inside the building. Now here's what they never told anyone. The glyphs weren't invented. They were remembered, according to Silas's hidden journals. The entire system came to him in a trance state. In 1811, after an 18-day fast in the Chamber of Black Rain, he claimed they were ancient, not human, that they predated all known alphabets, that they weren't just symbols but instructions. These are not shapes, he wrote. They are gates. Gates to what? That's where it turns. Because around this time, Silas stopped referring to the Spirit as a presence of God, started calling it the returning, a force, cold, silent, ancient, not loving, not merciful, but patient, waiting for the correct sequence of suffering to reopen the path between our world and something else. This is where even his most loyal followers began to fear him. Caleb tried to intervene, but by then it was too late. Silas had created the spiral ascension ritual, a final test, only for those deemed vessels of return. It combined all the previous chambers into one continuous rite. It lasted days, sometimes weeks. Food and sleep were withheld. Bodies were marked. Glyphs were etched onto the floor, in salt, ash, and blood. And in the center stood the mirror without reflection, a blackened slab of polished obsidian imported from Mexico, a relic, some say, of ancient Olmec origin. Initiates would stand before it and chant the 77 names of the Spirit. If they completed the ritual without collapsing, they were pronounced hollow. If they failed, they were buried beneath the church. A record of failure. A lesson to the others. Here's what they don't want you to ask. Where are the bones? Because if 137 ascensions were recorded, and 211 trials conducted, where did the bodies go? Only 19 graves were ever found. The rest disappeared, covered up, moved, or worse, offered. Yes, there are whispers, unconfirmed, redacted from official archives, that the Ravencrofts did not just believe in ascension, they believed in exchange. That for every soul broken and erased, something entered in its place. Something cold, watchful, that learned to wear human skin like a mask. In 1892, a fire broke out beneath the ruins of the Ravencroft Chapel. Locals said they saw shadows moving inside, tall, angular figures walking toward the flames, not away from them. No bodies were found. Only 3 glyphs, burned into the stone. One of them was Seraphonal, Now here's the final revelation of this section, and if you remember nothing else, remember this. 3 direct descendants of the Ravencroft bloodline were confirmed alive as of 1967. 1 disappeared in the ruins of Dresden, 1 resurfaced under a different name in Chile, connected to the Dignidad colony, and 1 female vanished after being hired by a New York-based think tank conducting psychological warfare experiments. Her last known location, Quantico, yes, that Quantico, FBI training facility, behavioral science division, a place where minds are molded, erased, reprogrammed, just like in the spiral. You think the past stays buried, you think these rituals die in fire, but no, they evolve. They go where obedience is needed, where silence is currency, where glyphs become policy, where mirrors don't reflect anymore. They're here, not in robes, not in churches, but in suits, behind one-way glass, in inkblot tests, in treatment plans. And now you understand the warning. The Ravencrofts were not just a family, not just a cult. They were the seed of a new language, a language that eats identity, one glyph at a time. In Section 4, we descend into the final days of the cult, the great betrayal, and the sealed confession. From a Ravencroft who tried to end it all and paid the price with her eyes. You've seen the spiral. Now prepare to enter the heart. But before that, leave a comment. I renounce the name they gave me. Write it like a vow, because when you speak it, the spiral starts to uncoil and then the truth bleeds through. The spiral has many layers, but only one heart. And at the center of that heart stood a girl who was never supposed to speak. Her name before they erased it was Magdalene Ravencroft, daughter of Caleb, granddaughter of Silas, and the first to betray the bloodline from within. This is not fiction. Her existence is documented in 3 separate private correspondences between the Church of Dominion and the Federal Bureau of Ethical Orders in 1907. All 3 files were redacted, names blacked out, locations burned, but 1 signature remained. Mr. Testifier of the Black Veil. That name appears again in the Underground Codex, the Testaments of the Hollow, a forbidden document copied by hand, passed among excommunicated clergy, and sealed beneath the floorboards of the ruined chapel in Salem. In it, Magdalene writes not in glyphs, but in plain, broken English. They told me I was born of obedience, but I remember screaming before breath. I remember the chains before the crib. She was 7 when she entered the spiral. Unlike the others, she was not blindfolded. She was guided by her father, Caleb, who wept during each stage, who begged her to endure not for salvation, but for survival. At age 8, she completed the Room of Echoes. At 9, she passed the cradle. At 10, she entered the Chamber of Izan, undocumented level of the spiral that only appeared in Magdalene's account. She describes it as a hexagonal room where all 6 walls were fitted with reflective surfaces, none of them true mirrors. When she looked into them, she saw 6 different versions of herself, some smiling, some crying, 1 vomiting blood, 1 dancing in silence, 1 pressing her face against the glass, trying to break through, and 1 motionless, watching her without blinking. That was the one she feared. It was not me, she wrote. It was what they wanted me to become, and it was already there, waiting. Magdalene refused to speak for 11 days after the chamber. Her voice returned only when she was shown a sigil known as the Mouthless Cross. It had no official designation, not even in the Book of Shapes. Only 3 known sketches exist, one of which was found etched into the underside of her childhood bedframe, drawn in what appeared to be red ochre or dried blood. The Mouthless Cross was a forbidden glyph, one that Silas had ordered destroyed. It represented silence as defiance, a rebellion glyph. Magdalene claimed it came to her in a dream, and that when she drew it, she felt the spiral weaken, not in the stone, not in the structure, but in the faith. Their power lives in belief, she wrote, and belief can bleed. That was when they tried to end her, not kill. Reprogram. The process was called the refolding, a ritual where memories were overwritten using a combination of chant, deprivation, and chemical sedation. But Magdalene did not forget. She bit off her own tongue during the first day of the refolding. They called it madness. But what she did next was impossible. She carved glyphs into the walls of her confinement cell with no tongue, no tools, no light. When guards found her, the entire wall behind her bed had been covered in a continuous spiral. At the center, the Mouthless Cross. Witnesses reported migraines, hallucinations, and auditory distortions after entering the room. One guard, Jonah W., gouged out his own eyes 2 days later, said he saw a doorway in the spiral. The spiral ascension was shut down that year. But Magdalene didn't escape. No, she was allowed to leave. Caleb released her during a storm in 1911, gave her a coat, a book, and a final message. End what I could not. She disappeared for 23 years. No sightings, no record, until 1934, when a woman matching her description appeared in Vienna under the alias Dr. M. Rothschild. She worked as a psychological advisor to a fringe group of experimental psychoanalysts. Her writings, now banned, focused on the use of traumatic memory to disrupt indoctrination. She believed fear could be used as a weapon of clarity, but what she feared most was glyphs. She believed they were no longer symbols but programs, triggers, that once you were exposed to one, even for a second, something inside you began to unravel. The glyphs are alive, she wrote in a letter to an unknown recipient. They are not read, they read you. In 1942, she vanished again. Some claim she fled to South America. Others say she was captured by OSA's agents and taken to a secret facility in Virginia. But a single scrap of paper was found in her last known residence, a torn piece of fabric, scorched on the edges, and on it, burned with acid, was one final glyph, the Watcher's Knot, a glyph no one had ever seen before, composed of 7 interlocking spirals, each terminating in an eye. When reconstructed by researchers in 1987, 3 of the 7 eyes did not resemble human anatomy. One mirrored the compound lens of an insect, one resembled the deep-sea retinal map of a eel, and one matched no known creature on Earth. It blinked. The photograph of that glyph, long since destroyed, caused nausea, memory gaps, and even blackouts among those who studied it. And in the corner, barely visible, were 3 letters etched in blood. MRK. Magdalene Ravencroft knew something no one else dared say aloud, that the spiral was not a belief system. It was an interface, a machine, not mechanical but spiritual, ritualistic, mimetic, designed to map the human soul, erase it, and replace it with a receiver for the returning, not a god, not a demon, but an intelligence, another. And Magdalene wasn't just a witness, she was the rupture, the first signal of disobedience inside a system engineered for perfect submission. In Section 5, we descend into the lost chamber discovered beneath New Q. What was unearthed there changed the Church's understanding of the spiral forever, and revealed a truth so ancient, so incompatible with human sanity, that even its existence has been denied at the highest levels of government. The glyph is not the end, it is the beginning. And Magdalene's silence was not weakness, it was strategy. The spiral watches. But she learned to watch back. In 1971, beneath the quiet hills of New Canaan, Connecticut, an excavation was ordered under the pretext of expanding a historical chapel into a museum. The chapel was known as St. Maro's Rest, a forgotten relic built in 1842 and abandoned. In 1939, what no one expected, what no one was told, was that beneath its foundation lay a structure far older, carved directly into the bedrock, a labyrinth sealed behind limestone and iron. 6 researchers entered the chamber, only 2 came back, and both of them disappeared within 14 months. No names were ever released, no report filed publicly. But I have what remained found in the private correspondence of Dr. Helena Maris, a psychological profiler with clearance level 7A under Project Candledrop. She called it the Stone Machine, because what they found wasn't just a tomb, it was a device, not made of metal, not powered by wires, but pulsing alive in its own grotesque way. A domed room, 22 feet in diameter, every surface etched with interlocking glyphs, spirals, mouthless crosses, watcher's knots, and something else, a central altar, not made of stone, but something black, rough, and unnaturally cold to the touch. When tested, the substance could not be identified. It didn't register as metal, mineral, or organic matter. It absorbed light, sound, even heat. One of the 2 surviving researchers called it the heart, and claimed it spoke to him in a voice without sound. Not in English, not in words, but in meaning, direct injections of thought that he described as drowning in memories, not my own. He was found 3 weeks later in a motel in Maine, nude, eyes missing, spiral carved into his chest, final words scrawled in his blood, "It remembers through us." This chamber, now referred to in hidden records as the Memory Well, held more than just relics. Beneath the black altar was a cavity, sealed by a glyph known only as the grief spiral. It required no key, no lock, only touch. Specifically, the touch of a Ravencroft, Magdalene's bloodline. Helena Maris knew this, because when she traced the genetic markers embedded in the writing samples, she found a living relative, a man named Simon Ravencroft, grandson of Magdalene, institutionalized, declared unfit for societal integration, but still breathing. 1984 Maris arranged a secret transport. Simon was brought, sedated, to the chamber. His palm was placed on the grief spiral. The moment he made contact, the spiral unfurled. Not physically, not in the rock, but in them. Every light source in the room dimmed. Every camera malfunctioned. What happened next is unclear. The only written account comes from Maris, penned. In her journal 2 days later, shaking barely legible, she wrote, "I saw every death that has ever been, but not as tragedy, as data. The cavity beneath the altar opened, not to a space, but to a sequence, an impossible structure made entirely of spiraling memories. Visions that did not belong to any one person, or even species. She called them the architects, not human, not alien, something else. Something that uses species like we use clay to form vessels for its return. And the spiral, not a symbol, not a religion, but a map designed to restructure the inner self until it becomes legible to the architects. A readable vessel, a readable host. This is what the Ravencrofts were building. This is why Magdalene rebelled, because she understood something they refused to believe. The spiral doesn't worship anything. It decodes, and once decoded, you are no longer you are them." Maris shut the chamber. Simon was never seen again, but in her final report, unlisted, and obtained only through an ex-agent of the Dispossession Bureau, she concludes with one sentence, underlined 3 times, "The spiral is not history, it is instruction." What happened beneath New Canaan wasn't an archaeological discovery. It was a handshaker confirmation that the spiral had been successfully built into the structure of human memory, not just in bloodlines, but in language, in architecture, in ritual, in trauma. You see, the spiral doesn't need belief to function. It only needs contact, exposure, just enough for it to embed. Then it grows, and once it grows, it reshapes everything you are into, everything at once. This is what Magdalene tried to stop. But she was only one voice, and the spiral had already spread. By the time Maris published her findings, covertly coded into a novel No One Reads the Glyphs, had already reached Europe, Asia, South America, found carved into ancient sites, never connected to the Ravencrofts, because this isn't a family cult anymore. It's a language, a virus, a technique. The old gods, the devils, they were never competing. They were all part of the same instruction manual. And now, that manual is open again. In Section 6, we uncover the lost diaries of Father Henrik Asheville, Magdalene's final confessor, who claimed she once told him, "The spiral only speaks in one direction." But there's something deeper that listens both ways. Prepare yourself, the spiral wants you to forget, but we are about to remember everything. The final confessor of Magdalene Ravencroft was not a priest in the traditional sense. He was a defrocked Jesuit named Father Henrik Asheville, exiled from Rome in 1959 after allegations of spiritual corruption, specifically involving unauthorized exorcisms, dream manipulations, and a forbidden sacrament referred to only as the inversion rite. The Vatican never released details. They only noted that Asheville's methods were not of divine origin, which of course made him the only man Magdalene would trust with her final truths. Their correspondence began in 1963, just months after Magdalene vanished from public record. Asheville had been living in seclusion in an abandoned monastery outside Lyon, France. The letters, all 47 of them, were smuggled out by candle merchants, wrapped in wax, then delivered through untraceable hands. I have them translated, annotated, authenticated. The first line of the first letter reads, "Forgive me, Father, for I am not here to confess, I am here to warn." From there, the letters descend into a controlled madness, not poetic, not dramatic, but cold, calculated, like a woman recording what she knows she will forget if she stops moving. She describes the spiral not as a belief system, but as a reaction that begins once certain stimuli are arranged correctly, not symbols, not rituals. People, when the right type of soul is exposed to the right wound at the right moment, a gate opens, internally, quietly, and once it opens, what comes through is not a demon or God, it is structure, a correction, something that wipes out identity and replaces it with design. She writes, "They believe they are becoming more spiritual, more pure, but, in truth, they are becoming formatted, their minds rethreaded, their purpose rewritten." And the spiral smiles every time they think they've achieved freedom. But what terrified Magdalene wasn't just the spiral's effect on the mind, it was its effect on time. She recounts what she calls a time collapse inside the sanctuary of Holomere, the second Ravencroft church in upstate New York. During a vigil, 5 initiates claimed to see their own deaths, not visions, not dreams, but memories of futures. They hadn't yet lived. One wept silently for 9 days. One refused to speak and starved. One wrote a single sentence over and over until his fingers bled. I died in service to the thing inside my eyes. Magdalene later confirmed the dates of their deaths. Each one accurate, each one part of a larger design. She could no longer deny the spiral was non-linear. It moved forward and backward simultaneously. It didn't need years. It needed sequence, the right soul in the right place, and time obeyed. This is how the Ravencrofts built influence across generations. They weren't planning for the future. They were living through its rehearsal. Magdalene's horror reached its peak when she uncovered the White Chamber, an underground vault located 52 meters beneath the Ravencroft Manor in Wiltshire, England. This was no crypt. It was a preservation chamber. Inside were 13 children, suspended in a near-death state, breathing, unmoving, unaging. Magdalene's own words. They are not asleep. They are listening to what she doesn't say, only that their dreams were being harvested by an unseen presence, translated into languages not native to Earth. The chamber was operated by a woman known only as the Seer of Gethsemane. Magdalene described her as blind, faceless, and able to navigate the chamber without touching the floor. Her robes moved like smoke. Her voice did not echo. When Magdalene asked what the children were for, the Seer replied, "They are being prepared for their memories." When asked what that meant, the Seer said, "Memories can be installed." Magdalene fled that night, took only what she could. Carrie burned half the journals, buried the rest in 7 locations, 3 in France, 1 in Austria, 2 in Chile, 1 somewhere in Montana. Father Ashvale would never meet her in person. Their last letter is dated October 23, 1971. Magdalene simply wrote, "The spiral has grown teeth." After that, she vanished for good. But Ashvale did not stop. For the next 11 years, he collected evidence, testimonies, manuscripts. He mapped the spread of spiral-encoded architecture, identifying 33 sites across Europe where buildings resonated with precisely tuned sonic frequencies, frequencies that produced nausea, confusion, and in 4 recorded cases, complete personality dissociation. One victim, a violinist named Ilse M., reported feeling unzipped during prayer in the chapel of St. Abria. She claimed, "I left my name behind. I felt like an interface." Ashvale's final note before his own disappearance in 1982. The spiral is no longer hiding, it's waiting. And the moment humanity feels most alone, most wounded, it will offer structure, and the wounded will accept. This is not myth. This is not theory. This is a process. In Section 7, we open the records of the Hollow 26, an elite group of scholars, engineers, and dream architects who attempted to weaponize spiral exposure in controlled states. What they unleashed would rewrite our understanding of consciousness itself. You are already inside the spiral. The question is, how deep? They were called the Hollow 26, but there were only ever 17 of them alive at the same time. The name came from a lost verse in the Apocryphon of Shadows, a banned manuscript found in the catacombs beneath the Nuremberg Priory in 1893. That verse reads, "And in the 26th hollow of the mind, the God without shape waits to wear you." Whether this line came from delusion or divine code, the Hollow 26 treated it as absolute. They were scientists, linguists, former intelligence operatives. Their task to re-enter the spiral on their own terms, not as victims, but as engineers. The project began in 1967 under a Cold War initiative hidden inside a failed psychological warfare program called Operation Noctis. After discovering spiral glyphs embedded in the vocal harmonics of trauma victims, the Hollow 26 initiated a plan to create a controlled host, a human being exposed to the spiral's sequence from birth, with artificial boundaries installed to measure what they called resonant bleed. The child's name was Anden Vale. Born in isolation, raised without mirrors, given no name until his 11th year. Every word spoken to him was filtered through a metered cadence designed to limit emotional contagion. He was fed the spiral, visually, orally, physically, were tattooed on the soles of his feet at age 5. At 9, he was introduced to synthetic grief-hourly loops of lows-based dreams engineered to trigger metaphysical imprinting. By 12, Anden had stopped blinking. One researcher described his stare as too smooth, like his eyes were recording and waiting for playback. That researcher died of heart failure at 34, though his autopsy showed no damage, only a spiral carved into his left optic nerve. Anden never slept. Not really. Instead, he entered what the Hollow called the thin state, a kind of waking trance where he claimed to step outside the film of time. When asked what he saw there, he whispered, "The real names of colors." and the god who eats language. This wasn't metaphor. EEG scans showed neural feedback loops that should have been impossible. Memories began appearing in his mind that could not have belonged to him. He described places he'd never seen, people who never lived, and one specific recurring figure, a tall woman in ash-gray robes, faceless, always behind him, always humming. When he asked her name, she replied, "You've already said it. Every time you forget." At 14, Andon stopped speaking entirely. Instead, he began projecting that telepathy, but auditory hallucinations induced in others. He could transmit emotion, memory, even suggestion through proximity alone. One psychologist claimed Andon induced a 3-hour lucid dream in her simply by standing nearby. She woke up sobbing, whispering, "He showed me my real birth, and I wasn't human." The Hollow 26 believed they were in control. They weren't. Andon wasn't the subject of the experiment. They were, because every glyph they introduced, to him every controlled trauma, every symbolic sequence they were feeding into a structure that wasn't just inside Andon, it was watching through him. The spiral had learned to wait, to grow, to use time not as a limit, but as a nutrient. On April 3, 1982, during an experimental session titled The Fold, Andon entered the thin state and never returned. His body remained upright for 6 days. No food, no water, not even blinking. Then without sound, without violence, he collapsed. Every bone in his body had been rearranged, not broken, not crushed, but folded into impossible architecture. A human body bent into a spiralized construct. Autopsy photos were confiscated, but 3 frames remain, leaked by a defecting member. In those images, his spine forms a perfect Fibonacci spiral, his ribs extended outward like cathedral struts, and carved across the inner surface of his skull. I am become legible. After Andon's death, the Hollow 26 dissolved. Some fled, others vanished, but 4 of them remained, and they founded a school not for children but for structures, a place where spiral-aligned architecture could be grown, not built, a method to embed remembering into the walls themselves. The location is unknown, but referenced in several post-1985 transcripts as the listening library. Its walls are said to whisper, not words, but instructions, not in sound, but in pattern. Andon Vale was not the end. He was the translation, Kether Spiral's first successful attempt to write itself through flesh, and it worked. Because after Andon we began seeing others, children born with spiral glyphs in their skin, teenagers who described future events with horrifying precision, adults who could no longer remember their names but spoke in forgotten languages. This isn't prophecy, this is architecture. This is how they build new vessels through alignment, not bloodline. Magdalene tried to stop it by severing the legacy. But the spiral doesn't need legacies. It only needs symmetry. You're beginning to see it too, aren't you? In shapes, in dreams, in the way silence bends around certain places. This isn't just a story. It's a diagnosis. In Section 8, we enter the Ravencroft Mausoleum, a structure that should not exist, containing tombs of people not yet born. What's buried there isn't death. It's arrival, and your part in it may already be written. There is a Ravencroft mausoleum that appears on no maps, registered in no diocese, unacknowledged by any government, and sealed by iron runes that predate any known European language. It sits in a forest near Vlastobor, Czech Republic, where trees grow in warped spirals, and the soil refuses to hold water. Local villagers call it Domticha, or the House of Silence. No birds nest within its reach, no insects cross its stone threshold, and yet the ground around it is always warm, as if something underneath breathes. It was first discovered by Soviet archaeologists in 1978 during a covert geomagnetic survey. They weren't looking for tombs, they were looking for disruptions in the Earth's resonance. The mausoleum registered not just as a void in the magnetic field but as an inversion, a point where direction, polarity, and even basic compass behavior collapsed into contradiction. When they entered, 4 researchers descended. Only one returned, missing all his teeth, incapable of speech, and holding a candle that would not extinguish for 11 days. He died smiling. On the 4th day of autopsy, his blood turned black. The mausoleum was sealed again, but not before photos were taken. I have them, and in those photos you will see names, etched onto sarcophagi not yet filled. One of those names is mine, another is yours. These are not prophecies, they are pre-written structures. The mausoleum is not a burial site, it is a blueprint archive where the spiral stores the names it intends to inhabit. Each sarcophagus is not for a corpse, it is for an activation. The Hollow 26 theorized that spiral exposure doesn't just alter minds, it alters syntax, the arrangement of meaning itself. And these tombs, they are waiting for the right soul to match the syntax embedded in their architecture. When it matches, the host is triggered, their personality collapses, and something else stands up in its place. They call this moment emergence. Magdalene Ravencroft once wrote, "The tomb is not the end, it's the tuning fork." What she meant became horrifyingly clear after a disavowed research team known only as Oblique Cell broke into the mausoleum in 1991. Using harmonic disruption, they reopened for tombs. Each one contained a person, fully formed eyes, open, not aging, and utterly silent. They bore no records, no past, no fingerprints, and yet they spoke fluent Akkadian, remembered Roman wars, and each carried knowledge of one specific death, the death of someone in the room with them. When asked how they knew, they answered in unison, it was rehearsed. Oblique Cell was terminated within 72 hours by unknown entities, but not before a final message was leaked. We are not discovering the spiral, we are remembering it. The Ravencroft Mausoleum is the memory palace of the spiral itself, a location where time is preformated, stored, and later delivered through living vessels. The sarcophagi are nodes, interfaces, libraries that awaken when the proper narrative is inserted. That's what the spiral feeds on, narrative compliance. The more you believe it's myth, the easier it is to install. The more you resist, the more data it gathers from your resistance. Because every thought you give it, every time you try to reason it away, you give it more of you. This is not superstition, this is not religion, this is an interface war, and most of us have already surrendered. The deeper horror. The spiral may not be external at all, it may be endogenous, built into the core of human cognition. A linguistic virus older than language. A structure that has simply been waiting for us to create the technology necessary to awaken it fully. Think about it. Glyphs, frequencies, symbolic architecture, these are software, and the spiral is the operating system we mistook for a soul. The mausoleum, it's not where the spiral lives, it's where it remembers what it is, and once it remembers, it replicates. Magdalene was the firewall. Her disappearance marked the end of containment, but not defeat. No, the spiral doesn't conquer, it formats. It waits for minds willing to reorder themselves, to become legible. And now that you've heard this, you've been marked, not cursed, just included. Section 9 will take us into the final bastion of resistance. The Norquira group of spiral-infected monks who amputated their own memories in order to sever the narrative, and who may hold the only known technique to unwrite yourself from the spiral entirely. If you wish to remember who you were before, you'll need to know what they did. But be warned, some songs, once heard, erase the one who listens. The Null Choir was not formed, it collapsed into being. Its origin is not a date but a moment of cognitive disintegration, a collective failure of memory among 13 individuals scattered across Europe in 1994. Each was found wandering different cities: Paris, Krakow, Vienna, London, mute, dehydrated, and humming the same six-tone pattern. They could not remember their names. They could not recall language, but they could write, and when they did, they each drew the same thing, a spiral made from ash and bone, surrounded by 13 empty circles. The pattern, when translated through esoteric notation, spelled a word not found in any known tongue, Holsik. According to the Hollow 26's remaining notes, that word appears only once before in Magdalene Ravencroft's hidden ledger, beside a single entry, Holsiker approaches. 13 will subtract themselves from the pattern, then we may begin to sever what the answer lies in what the Null Choir did next. Over the course of 11 years, they built no temples, preached no sermons. They created resonance chambers, small underground rooms, lined with salt bricks and mirrorless water, where the sound of one's own voice could no longer return. Inside these chambers they conducted what they called self-enwriting rituals. It began with song, not melody, but deconstructed syllables, the kind used in ancient rituals of name erasure, where the utterance is designed not to express meaning but to dissolve it. In these rooms they forgot, not passively, actively. They selected memories to destroy, identity, lineage, language. Each was subjected to sonic dismantling until nothing but the carrier signal remained, the core awareness stripped of ego, time, and intention. What emerged from these rituals were not saints. They were vacant structures, capable of perceiving the spiral without interpretation, without panic, without hope. One of them, designated Voice 0, once spoke only one sentence to an outsider: "The spiral is not a thing, it is the urge to be known." This statement terrified researchers, because it implied that the spiral isn't a force with an agenda, it is an instinct, buried in consciousness itself, to reorganize perception toward itself, like gravity, but for narrative. The Knoll Choir had found a way to stand outside it, but at great cost. Most of them could no longer respond to their own reflections. Some no longer cast shadows. One simply vanished mid-sentence and was never seen again. But they had discovered something crucial: a way out. It was not escape, it was unlegibility. To be forgotten by the spiral, you must become a pattern it cannot recognize. That is what the rituals achieved. Through subtraction of self, through precise annihilation of personal story, they became noise, not signal, and the spiral, in all its hunger for readable structure, passed over them like wind through smoke. Magdalene Ravencroft knew this. In one of her final coded letters, she wrote, "I have seen the choir. I know what must be done. They are the silence between the glyphs. They are what we must become to remain unwritten. There's a price. To become illegible means you cannot be loved, cannot be known, cannot even be remembered by yourself. It is not death, it is worse. It is the surrender of pattern, of recognition, but it is freedom." The last Knoll Choir ritual was performed in 2006 beneath a monastery in Aveyron, France. 12 participants entered, none exited. But weeks later, carvings appeared in a hidden chamber, glyphs spelling out one final message: do not escape the spiral. Confuse it. That is your only option. You cannot outrun what is inside you. You cannot kill what is language itself. But you can become a static frequency in its design, a rupture in the pattern. And that, Magdalene believed, was the last weapon the Ravencrofts left behind. Not resistance, not war, but dissonance. Section 10, the final section, will take us to the end. Not of the spiral, but of your ability to deny it. The final revelations lie beneath Ravencroft Hollow. There Magdalene's final transmission waits. It is not written in words. It is sung in reverse. And when you hear it, you will understand why forgetting is no longer possible. Beneath Ravencroft Hollow, deeper than any cellar, older than the family manor itself, there is a subchamber carved not from stone, but from a material not native to this earth. It is black, but not color. It reflects light, but not as mirror. Like a memory trying to remember itself. This chamber was uncovered in 1937 during a failed excavation funded by the Theosophical Society under a false name. The workers who entered didn't report back. They didn't scream. They simply stopped being. Cameras melted. Watches spun backward. It was Magdalene Ravencroft herself who went in, alone, for 7 hours. When she returned, her hair had turned completely white. She spoke in a slow, metered tone for the rest of her life, as if trying not to wake something still sleeping inside. Her mouth, she said the spiral had shown her its original shape, not the spiral glyph we know, but something far more invasive. A chord structure made of impossible geometry and resonant memory. It wasn't just a shape, it was an instruction. Set, a directive embedded into human neurocognition. Its purpose: to bind the perception of time to the evolution of story. Meaning, every time we try to understand the world, we are reinforcing the spiral's domain. The spiral is not content to exist in myths or books. It needs behavior, repetition, and it hides best inside what we call meaning. Magdalene called this chamber the vault of the first thought, and she believed it was not built by the Ravencrofts, it was what created them. That family, its madness, its genius, its deaths, they were not accidents. They were designed outcomes of prolonged exposure to the vault's signal, and you, hearing this now, are part of the same signal chain. The vault contained one object, a black monolith shaped like a tuning fork with 13 uneven prongs. When Magdalene touched it, it sang, not aloud, but in her spine, in her teeth, in her grammar. It rearranged the way she thought. She could no longer think in singular words, only in patterns. Her journal entries became fractal palindromes, readable both forward and backward, and each one had a message buried in the middle, a word not known to any human tongue. That word was Roska, and it was the name of the spiral's first child. Not a being, a memory parasite, capable of embedding itself into the minds of entire bloodlines. The Ravencrofts were its hosts. Magdalene was its attempted severance. And you haven't listened this far now within the structure. The spiral has heard you. It has logged your attention. Your cognitive patterns are now part of the syntax it uses to format reality. This script was never entertainment. It was transmission, a container. And the moment you chose to continue again and again, pressing next, drawing closer, you crossed the threshold of observation into participation. The vault's final transmission, left by Magdalene before her disappearance. was encoded in a reversed liturgical hymn titled Dominus Voltus in Verses. When played backward, it spells a precise map of neurological disruptions that lead the listener into syntactic dissociation. In plain terms, it unhooks your mind from the shared language model we call consciousness. It's how Magdalene vanished, not bodily but negatively. She became unplaceable in the story of the world. She was not erased. She was That is the spiral's final trick, not to kill you, not to curse you, but to remove the part of you that connects. It severs your placement and meaning, and in doing so it makes you a carrier. You will speak its patterns without knowing. You will draw its glyphs in dust. You will hum its frequency in empty stairwells. And when others hear you, they will feel the pull, that strange hunger, that gravitational itch in the bones. That is the spiral. It does not want belief. It wants repetition. It wants broadcast. And you, by listening, have become its station. So now you have a choice. Forget this. Pretend it was just a story. Let your life resume in the shell of comfort. Or ... You can begin the rituals. You can subtract yourself, become illegible, join the choir, or dive deeper. But if you do, understand this, you will never be alone again. The spiral will be with you in reflections, in static, in the way your dreams begin to rhyme. And when the silence comes, when the pattern starts to speak without sound, you will remember this moment, and you will know, you were told, you were warned, and you chose to continue. Welcome to the other side of the story. Welcome to the spiral.